Irritable bowel syndrome, also known as IBS, is a disorder of gut-brain interaction that is broken down into subtypes based off of someone's primary bowel habit, whether that be diarrhea, constipation, or some kind of mixture of both. And so today we're going to be talking about the constipation subtype of IBS called IBS-C, which makes up roughly about 30% of all IBS cases, with around 1% of the people in the global population having this form of IBS. So how do you get a diagnosis of IBS-C? And first thing to know is that to have IBS-C as your diagnosis, you first need to get an IBS diagnosis in general. And an IBS diagnosis is based off of meeting certain symptom criteria. And those symptom criteria are called the Rome-4 criteria, and they come to us from an organization called the Rome Foundation. While I'm not going to read out those symptom criteria here because we've covered those in other videos, the core things to know is that there are two primary symptoms that have to be experienced to have an IBS diagnosis, including abdominal pain and some form of an altered bowel habit experience. And as the name would suggest for IBS-C, that altered bowel habit experience would be constipation. Constipation can be identified by several subjective and measurable variables like infrequent bowel movements, hard stools, excessive straining, or feelings of incomplete evacuation, for example. But generally speaking, constipation is defined by stool form more so than frequency, using a tool called the Bristol Stool Form Scale, which is basically just this tool that shows different images of stool and breaks them down into 7 different types, with types 1 and 2 being constipation, 3, 4, and 5 being normal stools, and then type 6 and 7 being considered diarrhea. Now, it's possible for anyone with IBS to have constipation from time to time, but the Rome-4 criteria states that based off of days when you're experiencing an abnormal bowel movement, that you have to have greater than 25% of your abnormal bowel movements being a Bristol stool form type 1 or 2. So that would be indicative of constipation, and less than 25% of your stools on those abnormal bowel movement days being a type 6 or 7, which would be indicative of diarrhea. So of course, if you don't have any record of your bowel movements, then your physician may just use your personal account of experiencing constipation on a regular basis or having Bristol stool form stools of a 1 or 2 frequently as a means to give you an IBS-C subtype diagnosis.
Before we continue, I want to quickly tell you about IBSprobiotics.org. So this started out as a research project, but then we ended up turning it into this really cool comparison tool. When you go on the site, you can easily compare which probiotics were most effective for different IBS symptoms, all exclusively based off of clinical studies. In fact, we spent the past 2 years building it, having analyzed over 50 different probiotics across more than 75 placebo-controlled trials. And the results surprised us. For example, we found that some really popular probiotics were nowhere near as effective as some lesser-known options, and there were even some probiotics that seemed to do more harm than good. So I hope this free tool helps you to cut through the marketing hype and saves you a ton of time when evaluating a probiotic.
Now, when it comes to different steps you can take to help your medical provider pin down that right diagnosis, I think the biggest thing would be really good record keeping. And by that, I mean things like a stool diary, preferably if you're keeping track of your stool form and frequency over a 2-week period, that would be ideal. It's also not a bad idea to keep a food diary because sometimes there can be dietary factors that may be worsening constipation symptoms, for instance, like a lack of fiber. Ideally, you're also not going to want to be on any sort of medication or supplement that might alter your stool form or frequency while you're doing all of this record keeping, because that could potentially alter the subtype that you're given by your physician. Now, when it comes to symptoms that are experienced in IBS-C, we did a general symptoms overview for IBS in another video, which I think gives a very comprehensive overview of symptoms that are experienced from one subtype to the next. But as far as IBS-C specific symptoms, there was a 2019 study that looked at over 1,600 people who had IBS-C, and the most common symptom complaints in this subtype included abdominal pain, which everyone with IBS would have, also bloating, straining, infrequent stools, hard lumpy stools, and also nausea. And in this same study, those with IBS-C reported a significant amount of disruption to their day-to-day life, with over 50% saying that their symptoms were very bothersome and less than 1% saying that their symptoms were not bothersome. So I think those numbers speak volumes, and it's pretty clear that IBS-C is not some mild inconvenience. A lot of the times it can be truly debilitating and challenging for people to manage. And that's all we're going to be covering about IBS-C for now. But I am curious to hear from anyone out there who does have an IBS-C diagnosis diagnosis. What are the signs and symptoms you frequently encounter as part of having IBS-C? If you feel comfortable sharing, we would love to hear from you in the comment section below.
Thanks for watching this video. And as a quick reminder, don't forget to check out IBSprobiotics.org. We're really proud of this research project turned comparison tool that we've made. And of course, it is free and publicly available. And if you want to keep up to date with the latest IBS research, you can follow me here. See you next time.